do a review and get us reminded about what we've gone through so far, okay? First thing we set up way back when, actually that would have, is, you know, what holy matrimony is and setting up what God designed in creation, and we talked about marriage as a part of creation, right? And before that, I gave you a little, I still don't know if you understand what the rubber band is all about. Have I explained it, Laura? You got it now? Yeah. So, you know, the paradigm shift I have to make, I think we all as Christians have to make, is that we're the exception, not the rule. Not the exception from God's perspective. We are the rule from God's perspective, but from Satan's domain, who is the prince of this world, what we describe as marriage from the Christian and really Jewish perspective is it goes against the world. And the more I studied it, the worse it got. You know, when I studied some kingdoms and what I found out happened in those pagan kingdoms, I'm going to leave a lot of it even out of this Bible study. But it just, you know, the pagan world is the pagan world, and there isn't this idea. So as we move back to a paganism, and we are, right, in our world today, we can suggest that that's why things are going the way they are, and nothing's new under the sun, really, even though it's quite new for us, because our country has not ever been here like it is today. So we made sure, and hopefully what I'm trying to do is build up what the feminine is and the masculine, but I think I've been focused on the feminine for the most part because we're going to go into feminism, we're going to go into gender stuff, and just to redefine what it means to be a woman, because I think we totally destroyed it. We're going to start moving into that. Hopefully I'll get into a video today with Dr. Jordan Peterson, who's not a Christian, but he's that guy, you know that text, it says, you're very close to the kingdom of God when Jesus says that. I always feel like Jordan Peterson is that, because he's coming up with conclusions based on his profession as a psychologist. He comes up with these conclusions that line right up with the Christian ideas, and he's not studying he does study the Bible and that too, but his profession, you know, what he's discovering lines up, and so he'll tell us things that are very Christian just from his professional point of view when he talks to people and he tries to help people in their marriages and so on and so forth. And I'm going to show that. And the point being this, that the woman, the feminine, is, and we got this from Luther, the building. Remember that? You know, when God created Eve, she was the building that Adam would always come home to. And so a different word for creation was given to Eve as opposed to Adam from the ground. And hopefully we also recognize the Trinitarian thing going on here, right? It's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper for him, and this is before sin. So creation is not complete until Eve is created. When Eve is created, what is the birth? What did we give birth to? Very interesting. The church. It's interesting how the church is kind of like a building too, isn't it? You know, we always talk about, it's not, you know, we have a building here, but our fellowship and everything, we talk about coming to the church and coming home to Christ. Very interesting how all this works out. That's what we do when we come here. We come for the words of Christ. We come for the body and blood of Christ to return to our groom. But for us, it's the male comes to the building and the woman is the center of the family, in such that matrimony is about this, the call to motherhood. And so marriage, is that going okay? Marriage is a call to motherhood and a man coming to his building and returning to his building. And therein is where the gift of sex is given, and the gift of sex is always attached to motherhood, the procreation, right? And we're going to find when we move into feminism, we'll find that kind of the destruction of the procreation end of things is what's really hurting women, right? That's what I'm going to show you, all right? And others will show you too. All right, so then we hopefully gave a really good definition of marriage and the gift of it and how we do have the family coming from it and all that stuff we talked about. And the beauty of marriage, and then we had the second use of marriage, right? Remember what was the second use of marriage?
So they don't burn with desire.
Yes. So when sin enters into the world, all the ramifications of sin exist in all of us. So you can take any of the 10 commandments, and if it's bearing false witness, if it's coveting, if it's stealing, if it's murder, if it's not worshiping God, all these things, using God's name in the wrong way, all those results of sin exist in every human being. So if we go to the 6th commandment, and adultery, which really is a part of fornication, because adultery is fornication where one person or both people are married to somebody else, right? So we move into a fornication because of lust. So the 6th commandment has everything to do with lust, not marriage. But the thing that I think causes every one of us in a Bible study like this to go, and I noticed you didn't have many questions about that, is that every human being has it. Every human being has lust. And so the second use of the law, which we got from Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 7, was the Apostle Paul explaining to us that it's better to, what? Marry than to lust, or burn in lust. Okay, because it's such a powerful thing. What are the two most strongest urges in a human being? First one is eating. Second one is the sexual urge, right? So that's the unflattering part of the whole thing. And we have to understand that. So part of keeping society together is keeping marriage together, because then your spouse is supposed to handle your lusts. So that's what goes into a marriage, both the purity part of it, and I'm going to show you something where two guys are talking about attraction to the woman, which was really quite awesome. It's from a Catholic standpoint, but really awesome is how the man should really view the woman, and it's a very wholesome one. But again, the lust exists. So Paul says, you know what? Better to marry than to burn. Again, he's responding to a request from the Corinthians. So if something was going on in the Corinthian church, we had to address that for this particular church community. And so he's not saying that that's all that marriage is. He recognizes the true meaning of marriage, but he's dealing with that part. All right? Any questions about that? So that lust is what causes the trouble. Okay, when we get into everything, every sexual deviation from a man and a woman in purity in marriage, every sexual deviation from that comes from lust. Because you think about it, anything that you will do acting on lust is not inquiring about what happens in the purity of marriage, even this, of course, the sexual aspect of it, right? So if you're going to cheat on your wife or your husband, you're going after a lust. Any sexual deviations outside of heterosexual, you're going after some kind of lust. I would suggest when we move into feminism, you're moving into some kind of lust as well. And I believe it's something that women are really causing a lot of pain for themselves in, and we'll get to that. And then the gender dysphoria too, is that people are really messing up with that, because you'll find out based on statistics, some 80% of all people who are involved in gender dysphoria are somehow related to homosexuality or lesbianism, which is kind of both of those things. So it still stems from a deviation in sex. See that? All right? So for you and I as Christians, what are we hoping for the best? As Christians who are married. As married couples, we should be striving for what God says about what a woman is and what a man is, having in our minds the understanding of the gift of marriage and therein, right? And at the same time, your lusts are being taken care of by your spouse. All right? And that's the way that is. Any thoughts on that? Have you ever thought about it that way? Or did you already know this? I think you kind of already know this based on experience, but I think it needs to be spoken of so that we all understand where we're at with all of this. Right? So from here on out, we're going to start talking about the deviation, where all the trouble's coming from, right? So there you go. Not good, buddy. Fornication, we talked about that. There's your second use of marriage. We talked about the fact that we're simultaneously sinner and saint, so there's always going to be a problem with all of our sin, including fornication. And that's why we need to move forward in humility. Okay? You know, I've dealt with a couple of homosexuals in my day, and they have taught me. If you ever talk to a homosexual who has those tendencies, and they want to do the right thing because they truly are Christian and they don't like it, so that's what they're dealing with. All right. If you hear their story, it should humble you. At the same time, I'm trying to direct them in the right way, but it should humble us. And many of the people who are really involved in the gender dysphoria, they need our help. They need true help. They don't need for us to say, you go ahead and do it and do the sex change and it's going to change your life and you're going to be better, because it's not. But we have to approach people with humility because they're broken, okay? And don't think ourselves better than other people. From the lust comes the destruction of sex, comes the destruction of humanity, comes the destruction of our relationship with God in the end, doesn't it? Okay? And a rejection of the sanctity of marriage is a rejection of the sanctity of sex. And so therefore we have to be clear. Sex outside of this union between a man and a woman in holy matrimony is a sin with consequences, and there's no exceptions. All right? And this is where the church is really in battling each other, even within our church, when I'm dealing with it. If I deal with people who are involved in something that's outside of God's ordinance, and they come to me with humility, and I come with them with humility, work together, and it works. There's reconciliation involved in it. But that's not always what happens in our dear church, Emmanuel. All right? Because there's a tendency always to kind of say, oh, we have to, give in a little bit to society. I'm telling you, we have to hold on to the sanctity of marriage. All right? So it's important to remember it's deconstruction, and that's where we're moving. And the desanctification has been around for a long time, beginning with Adam and Eve, noticing their nakedness. That's where it starts. And we'll find that the worship of pagan gods in the Old Testament involves sexual immorality and children's sacrifice, which is exactly the same as it is now. And I've been reading this one guy who's a little bit on the fringe of things, but I'm reading his stuff anyway. And he says it's the return of the gods. And I can't help but read what he's saying. It's like the pagan gods are actually real to a certain extent. You know how we talk about, we think of graven images in the Old Testament. What do we say? Well, the person creates an owl or something like that. Or in the book of Genesis, where Rachel grabs the gods of her father when he's leading Laban, and she hides them, but she wants them. That story, and then Laban comes after her God. Well, who took my gods? And she sits on them and hides them. Remember that whole thing, right? It's not that it's her luck charm or good luck charm right now. There's meaning behind each one of the gods. And this man, and I would also suggest, there's demons behind each one of the gods. So in one sense, these gods are real. They're deceiving you because there's a whole theology attached to each of these pagan gods from the communities in which they were developed. Okay? And we'll look into that. So they really do influence and have influenced people, and they're back today. It might not be a statue of Moloch, although you'll find some of these fringe areas like some Satanists and witchcraft people, you'll start building some of these same things because they look in their history and they kind of attach themselves to it, which is really spooky, in my opinion, but they're coming back. So, here we go. What I want to do, though, is show you that the people of God, what the people of God, in other words, the chosen people in the scriptures, what they had to be told by God in the Levitical law. And what we have to do is put this in its place right around 1450 BC. What time period was that? Any guesses? That was the time of Moses, the Egyptian Empire. All right? So if you think of the story of end of Genesis, you have Joseph. He brings his family to Goshen in Egypt during the plague. And remember, Joseph is the one who had that 14-year period where God told the Pharaoh in a dream, 7 sick cows eat the 7 fat cows, and then there's the wheat as well. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. During the 7 years of plenty, Joseph was put in charge of all of Egypt to make sure they were able to store enough grain so that the 7 years of drought, they would have food for that time and people would come, right? Well, Joseph was a second-hand man to Pharaoh. His brothers who sold him into slavery are there before him. He tests them. We just finished this up over there today with the kids. And then what does he do? When he reveals himself, he keeps saying, "How's Dad doing?" "Your dad's fine. He's old, but he's fine." "Okay." And he says, "Go get your family. Here's a bunch of food. Get the family. You guys are going to come, and we're going to put you right next to the Nile River in the area of Goshen, and you're going to live in Egypt. And I'm going to take care of you." And so they do. So the chosen family of God, Jacob and the boys, Israel and the boys, they're in Egypt now. And what happens? 400 years go by, and for some reason, God blesses the Israelites in reproducing. They reproduce and reproduce. They become larger and larger and larger. Years go by, a new Pharaoh comes, and a new Pharaoh comes, right? And then the whole thing where the Pharaoh, 400 years later, says, you know what, or not 400 years later, pretty soon after that, because they were in slavery for almost that period of time. In other words, the Pharaoh enslaves the people of God, the Israelites, in Egypt, and God sends Moses to be the deliverer, right? So the people of God, the chosen Israelites, has spent centuries in Egypt, which means they have been influenced generation after generation after generation by the Egyptians. And they know the pagan gods of the Egyptians much more than they know of the one true God of their heritage coming from Abraham, right? So they would have lived there, and then there was the Exodus. Moses brings them out. Remember that? Remember what happens when Moses goes up Mount Sinai to get the law and the people become impatient? What do? They build the golden calf. They do their rituals. They involve themselves in orgies. And they say, these are the gods that got us out of Egypt. Because it's all they know. All right? They return to their pagan ideas. Moses comes down, and you know the rest of the story. So God's chosen people are very pagan. And so when Moses writes the Levitical law, this is the law that he gives to the people. And when I read this to you, understand that God is telling them not to act this way, but to act this way sexually. And you know the reason why he's doing that is because they're involved in all these things. Because when you read it, you'll go, well, that's common sense. Of course you don't do that, right? But they don't know it. That's how depraved the very chosen people of God are. So I'm going to read to you what God has to tell the chosen people how to act, all right? It'll go for a while, but I just wanted to get the flavor of it. Keep my decrees and laws, says God. No one is to approach any close relative to have sexual relations. I am the Lord. Do not dishonor your father by having sexual relations with your mother. She is your mother. Do not have relations with her. Do not have sexual relations with your father's wife. That would dishonor your father. Like, you have to be told this. Do not have sexual relations with your sister either, your father's daughter or your mother's daughter, whether she was born in the same home or elsewhere. Do not have sexual relations with your son's daughter, your daughter's daughters. That would dishonor you. Do not have sexual relations with the daughter of your father's wife, born to your father. She is your sister. Do not have sexual relations with your father's sister. She is your father's relative. Do not have sexual relations with your mother's sister, because she is your mother's close relative. Do not dishonor your father's brother by approaching his wife and having sexual relationships. She is your aunt. Do not have sexual relations with your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. Do not have relations with her. Do not have sexual relations with your brother's wife. That would dishonor your brother. Do not have sexual relationships with both a woman and her daughter at the same time. Do not have sexual relations with either her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter. They are her close relative. This is wicked. Do not take your wife's sister as a rival wife and have sexual relations with her while your wife is living. That's interesting, because that is exactly what who did? It would be Jacob with Rachel and Leah. Do not approach a woman to have sexual relations during the uncleanness of her monthly period. Do not have sexual relations with your neighbor's wife, and defile on and on. This is very important. Do not have sexual relations with your neighbor's wife, defile yourself. Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Moloch. All right. You know who Moloch is? I'm gonna introduce Moloch down the road here. Moloch is a giant statue that the pagans would sacrifice children on, and he ends up with a bull, because he ends up becoming like Baal. By the beginning, he looks more, kind of like a bullish animal, and he sits like this, and he has this pot, or this like giant pot on his hands, and what they do, they rev the fire up here, and they get it going really hot, and then they take their newborn babies and they put it on there, and while they're sacrificing their babies, they're hitting the drums very loud, and they would hit the drums louder and louder to try to drown out the cries of the babies. And that's the kind of sacrificial system that is involved in those days, and has always been, in order to appease the gods, to be good to the community, because the gods are mean, so you better sacrifice their children. So that's what they did. It's very interesting that he's saying this as he's telling you not to be sexually deviant. Isn't that interesting? That theme happens all the time. Do not give any of your children to sacrifice to Moloch, for you must not profane the name of the Lord. I am your Lord. Do not lie with a man as one lies with a woman. All right, right there you know that homosexuality is not, it's in the scriptures. You can't deny this. These are Levitical laws. It's not metaphor, okay? Do not lie with a man as one lies with a woman. That is detestable. Do not have sexual relations with an animal and defile yourself with it. A woman must not present herself to an animal to have sexual relations with it. That is a perversion. Do not defile yourselves in any way with these ways, because this is how the nations that I am going to drive out before you defile. See? Israel, you're supposed to be set apart from the norm of what all the other, but you keep what? And this is the problem with Israel in the whole Old Testament. They keep wanting to be like what? The world. And that theme goes throughout the scriptures. As soon as they go into the world, and God, in the time of Judges, you'll find in the time of Judges, they keep going the way of the world, and then what do? They say, we want a king. Well, why do you want a king? Because we want to be like the other nations. And God says, you don't need a king. Keep it a theocracy. Let me give you the rules and let people enforce the rules here. No, we want a king. And then when they get the king, look at what happens. This fornication continues throughout the time. And there's always the kings that do, he did worse than his son. And they're always going back to the Asherah poles, which we'll talk about, the spreading of trees, which we'll talk about, and sacrifice of children always exists within this. So the Israelites are trying to be like the world. And he's saying, I'm going to drive these people out because they're wandering in the desert, right? And what happens in the book of Joshua right after that is, I'm going to be with you and you're going to drive these people out of the land that I promised Abraham. Don't be like them. But like the rubber band, they keep going back. Everyone who does anything must be cut off. I think that's just enough to kind of give you an idea. Coming out of Egypt, the golden calf story, Moloch and Baal is already part of their religious ideas. Verse 21, that's the one that I guess. Okay. All right, so what happens? Let's move over to time of Jeremiah just to give you some more stuff here. Jeremiah would have been a prophet during the Babylonian exile. So now that was 1450, all right? Now when you get to Jeremiah, you're at around 626 to 586 BC. Closer to 586, all right? So now you're getting past, the Israelites would have had a king, they would have had the dynasty of David, then Solomon, there would have been a splitting up, Solomon with all his wives, and then from that point forward, if you read the Samuel, the Kings, and the Chronicles, you'll get a history of this moving back to the pagan ideas and pagan sexuality and all that stuff. So Jeremiah the prophet, the weeping prophet, during this time, right around, 1,000 years later, when all this stuff still continues to go on, and by the way, God still has his chosen people. Let's see what Jeremiah has to say to the people as a prophet, who, by the way, is a prophet who was exiled. The people of Judah who have done evil in my eyes, declares the Lord, they have set up their detestable idols in the house that bears my name and have defiled it. They have built, here we go, the high places of Topheth in the valley of Ben Hinnom to burn their sons and daughters in the fire, something I did not command, nor did I enter in my mind. So beware of the day that is coming, declares the Lord, when people will no longer call it Tabith or the valley of Ben Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter, for they will bury the dead in Topheth until there is no more room. Then the carcasses of the people will become food for the birds, and on he starts speaking about his judgment. All right? These are the reasons why God finally said, okay, Babylon, go into Jerusalem, demolish the temple, and take the people out of there. He had it. And this was Judah even, where the promise was. Now the promise remained with the people, because what happened 70 years later, just to show you the grace of God. They're going to return. But this is what they're doing. They're no different than the pagans out there. Okay? I'm going to go back to 1450 because I want to show you that this has always been the case. So now let's go back to Moses. 1,000 years before that, that's Jeremiah talking to the same people of God. Spreading of trees. I'm going to have to get very graphic here. Deuteronomy 12. All right, I'm just going to start with the beginning of 12. These are the decrees and laws you must be careful to follow in the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you to possess as long as you live in the land. Destroy completely, and you'll notice God is always telling them to destroy these places. Again, this is 1450 BC. All right? Destroy completely the places on the high mountains and on the hills and under every spreading tree where the nations you are disposing worship of their gods. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and burn the, here we go, Asherah poles in the fire. Cut down the idols of the gods and wipe out their name from those places. All right? So what they would do, they would find high places. This is all part of pagan worship. They would find trees. And you know how the roots have like a spreading look to it? Do I have to explain what that means? Like kind of the spreading of the legs of a woman. And that's where they would set up their Asherah poles and have sex with the prostitutes. Okay? And remember when I told you, like even in the pagan times during in Corinth, and what they thought that would do? It's always associated with the pagan gods. They're always trying to appease the pagan gods or get them to do what they wanted them to do. And it was also often associated to, farming and making sure that they have enough rain and what have you. And there's also the child sacrifices, and that has to do with appeasing the gods to make a sacrifice. Okay. 1 Kings 14. Now we're going to jump to 930 BC, okay? 1 Kings 14. (22 through 24). All right, so now 1 Kings is not First Kings is a historical book. So who's writing the First Kings, they're talking about what's actually going on. It's like Genesis or Exodus or Matthew, right? What I read from Jeremiah is the prophecies of Jeremiah. So he's speaking for the Lord, all right? So it says, Judah, and this is what they did. Judah did evil in the eyes of the Lord. By the sins they committed, they stirred up his jealousy or jealous anger more than their fathers had done. They also set up for themselves the high places, the sacred stones, the Asherah poles on every high hill and under every, here we go, spreading tree. There were even male shrine prostitutes in the land. The people engaged in all detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. Now, what do you get out of this? Besides it seems like the chosen people always had a tendency, like the rubber band, to go the way of the devil. But what do you get out of all of this? You notice one thing that always happens. There becomes judgment in the end. But what does God never do?
Give up.
He never gives up, and he never totally lifts his hands from his chosen people. That's the thing you have to always remember. So in the Old Testament, the New Testament is concealed, right? In the New Testament, the Old Testament is revealed. And so he's already setting up your predestination, your being chosen by God. And the fact that he never gives up on you. He's always going after you, like the shepherd who's looking for the one that's lost. So, you know, this is where I would say to somebody, if you're engaged in something and you think that God is just not going to forgive you for this one, he will. He wants you. He does whatever he can to bring you into his fold and give you forgiveness. He doesn't stop. Even at the end of this thing, he's still going to keep his promise where the Savior comes from Judah. But they're no different than the rest of them based on their sinful nature. And we as Christians have to understand, we're no different than any of these people that are outside doing their deviations, except that we have the grace of God. And we have bestowed the Holy Spirit, and we are able to do the things that we're due based on the power of God through Jesus Christ, okay? It's very important to understand that. But you notice the difference. You notice the language, all right? 2 Kings 16. Now, this would be 730 BC. I'm just trying to tell you that God is having to say the same thing to his people over and over again. 2 Kings 16. Two through 4. Well, I'm just start with 1. In the 17th year of Pekah, son of Ramiliah, Ahaz, son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem, so this would be Judah, 16 years. Unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and even sacrificed his own son in the fire, following the detestable ways of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burnt incense at the high places, on the hilltops, and under every what? Any guesses? Spreading trees. You see what's happening here? You know, you see child sacrifice and associated with sexual deviation throughout the whole thing. Somehow they go together, and they still do today. Why is it that the feminist movement is the one that's radical in regards to abortion? Think about that. And what I'm going to try to show you is that the whole feminist movement has duped women and have actually caused them to lose the protection that they so desire, messing with people's minds. And the same effect is happening, okay? All right, now we go to Babylon, from you to Jeremiah 2:20.
Did you do 2 Kings 17 yet?
Do you have it?
No, but
Did I skip it?
Yeah.
Oh, can you go? You had it right with you? Can you read it?
You did 16, but I don't think 17.
Oh, okay. All right. Does anybody have it? Can you read it nice and loud?
With me.
Yes.
They set up sacred stones and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. At every high place they burnt incense, as the nations whom the Lord had driven out before them had done. They did wicked things that provoked the Lord to anger. They worshipped idols, though the Lord had said, "You shall not do this." The Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and seers. Turn from your evil ways. Observe my commands and decrees, in accordance with the entire law that I commanded your fathers to obey, and that I delivered to you through my servants the prophets. But they would not listen and were as stiff-necked as their fathers, who do not trust in the Lord their God. They rejected his decrees and the covenant he had made with their fathers and the warnings he had given them. They followed worthless idols and themselves became worthless. They imitated the nations around them, although the Lord had ordered them, "Do not do as they do." And they did the things the Lord had forbidden them to do. They forsook all the commands of the Lord their God and made for themselves 2 idols cast in the shape of calves and an Asherah pole. They bowed down to all this starry host, and they worshipped Baal. They sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire. They practiced divination and sorcery, and sold themselves to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, provoking him to anger.
Yeah. So Moloch, associated with the calf that they did in back 1450 BC, child sacrificing at the same time. Jeremiah 2:20. Now we're back to like 540 BC. Long ago you broke off your yokes and tore off your bonds. You said, I will not serve you. Indeed, on every high hill and under every spreading tree, you lay down as a prostitute. 17, are you getting the picture? It's throughout the scripture. 17, 2 through 10. I'm going to start with 1. Judah's sin is engraved with an iron tool, inscribed with a flint point, on the table of their hearts and on the horns of their altars. That's Baal. Even their children remember their altars and Asherah poles beside the spreading trees and on high hills, my mountain in the land, and your wealth and all your treasures I will give away as plunder together with your high places because of sin throughout your country. Though your own fault you will lose, or through your own fault you will lose the inheritance I gave you. I will enslave you to your enemies in a land you do not know. For you have kindled my anger, and it will burn forever. This is what the Lord says. Cursed is the one who trusts the man who depends on flesh for his strength and whose heart turns away from the Lord. He will be like a bush in the wasteland. He will not see prosperity when he comes. He will dwell in a parched place of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. But blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord with confidence in him. He will be like a tree planted by the water. That's Psalm 1, right? Because you're planted by the water. You're planted by God's word, and you're always in God's word, and you're being fed by the truth, true water. And that will send out the roots to the stream. It does not fear when the heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in the year of drought and never falls or fails to bear fruit. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind to reward a man according to what his deeds deserve. Oh, we keep going to 17. Anyway, you got the point, right? Let me do Isaiah because I haven't done Isaiah. Isaiah 57, 1 through 10. This would have been earlier on. This was like the 7th century BC. The righteous perish, and no one ponders in his heart. Devout men are taken away, and no one understands. That the righteous are taken away to be spared from evil. Those who walk upright enter into peace. They find rest as they lie in death. But you come here, you sons of a sorcerer or a sorceress, you offspring of adulterers and prostitutes. Whom are you mocking? At whom do you sneer and stick out your tongue? Are you not a brood of rebels, the offspring of liars? You burn with lust among the oaks, that's the spreading trees, and under every spreading tree you sacrifice your children to the ravens. See that? The connection between the two? The idols among the smooth stones of the ravens are your portion, that they are your lot. Yes, to them you have poured out drink offerings and offered grain offerings. In the light of these things should I relent? You have made your bed on a high and lofty hill. There you went up to offer your sacrifices. Behind your doors and your doorposts you have put your pagan symbols. Forsaking me, you uncovered your bed. You climb into it and open it wide. You made a pact with those whose beds you love, and you looked on their nakedness. You went to Moloch with olive oil and incense and perfumes. That's where you sacrifice your children. You sent your ambassadors far away and descendants to the grave itself. You were wearied by all your ways, but you would not say, it is hopeless. You found renewal and strength, and so you did not faint. All right. Any thoughts? Against all of this, lust carried on in the way of deviation. Remember where the sanctity of sex belongs. Okay? So, we're going to enter into a new part right here, and this is the sexual revolution. I think we could go to the 60s and kind of find a time where we are at right now has its roots. It's not like it wasn't always here, but remember the 60s? I was born in the 60s. Who here remembers the 60s? A couple of you do. You guys probably have a better handle on what happened, but the whole sexual revolution. Now, when I talk about this, we're going to talk about birth control. And there are different opinions on birth control. And even within the Lutheran Church, we're actually talking about it again. The Lutheran stance on birth control has always been, you can use birth control for family planning, right? Ever since the 60s, that's pretty much been the Lutheran idea, as long as the type of birth control doesn't destroy a fetus or it is after conception of a child. Okay, so any kind of prevention outside of that. The Lutheran Church has always been, I would suggest, pretty liberal on that. All right, but what you're going to find both with professionals and the Catholic Church that always saw it differently. Now we've got people within the Lutheran Church, professors within the Lutheran Church. Dr. Peter Scare at the seminary is a guy, and he's like me, and it's really interesting. He's about my age, same thing, has a wife and 3 kids. I have a wife and 3 kids, and he says, so I did it the way really a lot of us did it, right? And again, here's our position. If you're using birth control, according to Lutheran Church, it's fine as long as you're not in any way destroying a fetus. But the point is this, and this is what we're going to get to, is that the birth control pill, along with the sexual revolution, a combination of those two things, kind of took the matrimony out of sex. Does that make sense? Where we got really good, and we are now really good at being able to have sex and pretty well make sure, if you're doing it right, you don't have a baby produced. In the old days, there was always ways in which people did birth control. You know what they are, but they're not as good as the pill, right? They weren't always, 99% like the pill is now, okay? And both professionals and Catholic Church has always believed this. Lutheran Church is just kind of, we're examining it again. What has that done with the feminist movement and just how we view sex now? Because sex with that, plus the idea that, the sexual revolution says basically go ahead and have sex with people outside of matrimony, and the whole, everything that goes from that. This has, in many ways, destroyed marriage, and again, the true meaning of what sex is supposed to be. Make sense? So, I'm going to show you a video. This is Dr. Peterson. Again, he's speaking not as a Christian, but as a professional. And I'm going to see what you think about this, okay? You know, if you want, if you could move it to see this, then, because this is at what, 10 minutes or so, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, and move it back. All right. So let's listen to this.
So my question is, as a redeemed progressive, what is the key to empowering men in the Me Too age while maintaining healthy boundaries and strong behavioral expectations?
We've had relatively reliable birth control since 1960. Okay, that's not very long. And we underestimate the unbelievable technological triumph of birth control. It's the hydrogen bomb, it's the transistor, like it's a major league transformation in human interaction. Women are now free from involuntary reproduction. That's never been the case in the entire history of the planet. Okay? We don't know exactly what to do about that. Okay, so the first idea in the 60s was, hell, let's party. And you know, you could see why. It's like, what the rules for not engaging in promiscuous sexual intercourse seemed to have vanished. So we had a couple of decades of experimentation. It's like, well, how'd that go? Little hard on the family, I would say. That's not so good for kids. AIDS, that wasn't a plus. Could have killed us all. And it mutated, particularly to take advantage of promiscuous sex, because viruses are very tricky things. So it turns out that sex is a little bit more complicated than we thought. Well, it actually turns out that it's a lot more complicated than we think. Okay, and now it's 50, 60 years later, and we're trying to sort this out. It's like, well, when is it okay to have sex? Exactly. And when is it not okay to have sex? And what does it mean that it's okay? And what does consent mean? And the answer to that is, well, we never used to have to think these things through, because the rule was don't have sex until you get married. That was the rule. Now that isn't the rule. Okay, so what's the rule? Well, we're not having a conversation about the rule. We're waiting till someone does something that seems like it might be untoward, and then mobbing them and trying to extract the rule out that way. And it's not a very effective way of doing it. You know, you want to decrease campus rape? That's easy. Get rid of alcohol. No one has that conversation. It's like, I did my PhD work on alcohol. 50% of the people who are murdered are drunk. And 50% of the people who kill them are drunk. And almost all the date rape situations are consequences of excess intoxication. But yet there's a party culture on campuses, and anything goes. And you also have this strange thing, especially on the radical left, which is unbelievably paradoxical, where absolutely every form of sexual expression imaginable is 100% permissible, because sex is fine, but it's so dangerous that while you're dancing with someone at a Princeton mixer, you have to ask them 2 or 3 times if it's okay for you to continue. And that's actually the case, by the way. I'm not making that up. It's like, well, both of those things can't be true. Now, what's happening, I think, on the Me Too end of things and the affirmative consent end of things is the old sexual taboos are reasserting themselves. The idea that we can extract sex out from emotional intimacy, and especially emotional intimacy, I would say, psychological intimacy, maybe even from long-term relationship, I don't believe it's a tenable idea. I don't think we can do it. And a lot of what we're seeing is the backlash against that. It's like, well, I feel used. You know, because one of the things that's happening on the really radical end of the sexual abuse movement is the idea that, well, if you have intercourse with someone and then you regret it the next day, that's evidence that it wasn't consensual. Well, it is, in a sense, evidence that it wasn't consensual, because it's evidence that you didn't bloody well think it through, right? It was good for last night, but it's not good for today. It's not very wise. The question is, well, what constitutes consent? And we need to have a very serious conversation about that. Like, under what circumstances is it acceptable to give consent? But we're not mature enough to have that conversation. We want it both ways. We want to be able to do whatever we want, with whoever we want, whenever we want, with no consequences, and we want there never to be any trouble about consent. It's like, well, no, that's not going to happen. I don't think that sex works very well outside of committed relationships. I don't think there's any evidence that it does. There's a strong proclivity across cultures for the enforcement, social enforcement of long-term monogamy. And there's reasons for that. And I think you deviate from that at your peril. So now, if you want to deviate from that, there's all sorts of reasons to do it. And I can understand why people are interested in adventure and all of that. But, you know, my sense also as a clinician is, you know, you only really get to try out about 5 people in your life. You have to make a decision pretty damn quick. You know, like between 20 and 30, there's a lot of things to get straight, and long-term mate is usually one of them. And most of the time, people should be more careful with their sexual behavior when they're young, especially when they're drunk, than they are. And I just think it's so interesting that all of the taboo reconstruction is coming from the radical left. It's not what you'd expect at all. You'd think it'd be the damn right-wing Christians complaining about, you know, sexual immorality. It's like, no, it's the radical lefties. You know, you have to have signed consent before making any physical move. And then that's so what? Really? Who thought that up? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You know how awkward that would be? You know, you're supposed to be able to do a little bit of nonverbal reading, right? I mean, that's part of romance. You don't see it. You ever see a movie where the 2 people who are dating exchange consent notes? Like, that doesn't happen. So it's an unrealistic solution. But I think the real solution is that despite the fact that we have reliable birth control, we're going to have to relearn what the acceptable rules of propriety are with regards to sexual relationships. One of the things I often tell my young clients is, don't do anything physically with anyone that you wouldn't talk to them about. Because if you're too damn embarrassed to talk about it, well, maybe it's a little premature in the relationship to actually do it. And then there's harm in it. You know, there's emotional harm in it. On both parties. There's the cheapening of both parties. So it's going to take us a long time to sort this out. But hopefully we can do it in a serious manner, and it won't be merely a matter of mobbing those who seem to have made an error. So, all right.
Step into Wix Studio, the web creation platform built for agencies.
Yeah, I'm going to do another one. You can move it for a second. I think I'm going to do these back to back, because that's a clinician, right? This is from a professional point of view. He's not necessarily speaking from a Christian standpoint. And
we knew that when he called us damn right-wingers.
Yeah. Interesting. You know what he said about Jesus?
Oh, I'm afraid to ask.
No, he's. It's so interesting because he even has writings on the scriptures. He says, this is what kind of breaks my heart, and I hope that he will become a Christian someday. I feel like he's all, he even starts crying at this. There's a moment where he says, if it were true, if Jesus is what the Christian says it was, he's overwhelmed of what that would imply. But at this point, you just can't believe that that's possible. But like, he's right there. No, it's true. You know, And when I watch him, yes, but what he has a problem with is that pure grace of God. Because he wrote a book like 12 Steps or something like that. I don't know what it was. I didn't read the book, but it's something about 12 steps. He talks about making your bed in the morning for kids, you know. And you could sense that. He has to he has to understand the mirror. He has to understand grace. But it's too much for him. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so, but now I'm gonna, now this is a guy, these are a couple of Catholics. I looked all over the place, and these guys, I thought, said it the best. They say things quite, they're very direct in what they say, okay? But this is from a Christian perspective, and I think these guys hit the same nail. And they're going to talk about birth control. They're going to talk from a Catholic perspective, so you can agree or disagree to one point or another with what they're saying. But think about the root of what they're saying, okay?
Because think about it, if we say, I'm attracted to her breasts, but I don't honor the fact that they're made to feed babies, if I'm attracted to her womb, but I'm not honoring the fact that her womb is designed to carry life, then I'm gutting her of the very essential, deep truth of her womanhood.
And you're not really attracted to her.
Exactly. You're attracted to the pleasure you can get from her at her expense. And again, the sexual revolution has sold a pill of goods to women saying, gut yourself so that men can treat you this way and you'll be liberated? Haven't, in fact, women made them enslaved now to the disordered passions of men? Jason and I have been so jazzed with a project I'm working on lately, taking a deep dive into Karol Wojtyła. This is before he became John Paul II, his book, Love and Responsibility. I studied it years ago, probably read it 3 or 4 times, once before I got married, then 2 or 3 times when I was in my early marriage. Now, 26 years of marriage under my belt and revisiting this book, it's just unfolding for me at a whole new level. And I'm so excited to teach this course next summer on love and responsibility. But I want to share an insight he had about what marriage is and this idea of matrimony, right? Matrimony. We know that's kind of like a fancy word for marriage. But if you pick it apart, matrimonus, it means the call to motherhood.
Beautiful.
So check this out. He says, marriage is the stable institution that protects the eventual motherhood of a woman.
Think about that.
Right? And in doing so, he says, it frees her in some fundamental measure from the anxiety that otherwise prevents a woman from genuinely opening herself up and surrendering to a man in sexual intercourse. So let's just pause there for a minute. Here we have this fundamental difference of men and women. The male is the kind of being who generates life outside himself. The female is the kind of being who generates life within herself, which means much more is at stake for a woman in the sexual act than for a man. She's the one who gets pregnant. She's the one who carries the baby. The man can plant a seed and go his merry way. But he's saying, JP2 is saying, marriage is the stable institution that acknowledges that sex leads to babies, loves the fact that sex leads to babies, and provides the environment where having a baby is a good thing. It's not something to ward off. We are in a relationship in which we know that sex leads to babies. And I'm saying as a man, I love the fact that sex leads to babies, saying that to my wife. And my whole life, I am gearing towards honoring this fact. Right? And this alone, JP2 says, frees the woman from this anxiety that would otherwise prevent her from genuinely opening herself in sexual intercourse, because she knows the risk that's involved for her. She's the one who carries the baby. And then I was thinking on this as an understanding of marriage, and it dawned on me that in the modern world, so-called liberated women have forfeited their God-given right to this harmonious reality, this genuine, loving reality of a marriage, of a man who's really going to love her. Not that marriage itself is a guarantee that the man's going to love you, but it's the objective framework that sets you up for success in learning what it really means to love. But in the modern world, women have said, in order to get rid of my anxiety, I'm no longer going to look for a man who's going to love me my whole life in order to protect the fact that I'm the one who would be pregnant, would be pregnant. Instead, I'm going to take the pill so that I can have the sex and not get pregnant.
And be like a man.
And be like a, right. What are men? Men are the kinds of beings who can have sex and not get pregnant. Women have exchanged, by buying into this liberation model, the false liberation, women have actually made themselves slaves to the lusts of men. It's like the whole sexual revolution, women have been saying, if you can't beat them, join them. Right? We're just, okay, we're just gut our whole motherhood reality, and now I can have sex rampantly like you want to. And really, I'm surrendering. From the woman's perspective, I'm really throwing in the towel, and I'm saying, go ahead and treat me like an object. And it just dawned on me in a new way that to render the sexual act sterile is inherently anti-matrimonial. It is a contradiction of the call to motherhood. Right? It is an inherently anti-marital act. Thoughts? What's stirring in your mind? That's just
what's stirring in my mind is more personal, which is this whole idea of seeing a woman and recognizing her motherhood, or her potential motherhood in just the fact that she's a woman, and how the journey that I have been on with the Lord to bring me to the point that is so beautiful, like that is so amazing, and that what attracts me to my wife, and just when I'm traveling, whatever, and I see other women who are attractive, what is attractive about them is this idea that they were created to be moms. Like their bodies were created to have life in them and give birth to that life. That is what I'm most attracted to. And what's beautiful about that is that preserves me, yes, from lust. It preserves, when I'm seeing that beauty in a woman in that way, I'm not doing anything to dishonor my wife. It's quite the opposite. I know my wife even more intimately that way, and I love her even more because of that. I'm just seeing that beauty in this other woman, and it frees me to honor that beauty without trying to own it or grab it or take it in some disordered way, even just in my thoughts.
John Paul II calls that an integral attraction to the beauty of the other. And he points out that what is it that a man is attracted to in a woman? He's attracted to her breasts. He's attracted to her womb. He's attracted to her birth canal. Right? All of this that he's attracted to is designed by God to bring about the amazing miracle of motherhood, which of course can't happen without fatherhood. Right? If she becomes a mother through him, he's the father. He experiences fatherhood. And the integral attraction is to hold all of that together. Because think about it. If we say, I'm attracted to her breasts, but I don't honor the fact that they're made to feed babies. If I'm attracted to her womb, but I'm not honoring the fact that her womb is designed to carry life. If I'm attracted to her birth canal, but I'm not honoring the fact that it's designed to give birth, then I'm gutting her of the very essential, deep truth of her womanhood.
And you're not really attracted to her.
Exactly. You're attracted to the pleasure you can get from her at her expense. And again, the sexual revolution has sold a pill of goods to women saying, gut yourself so that men can treat you this way and you'll be liberated? Haven't, in fact, women made them enslaved now to the disordered passions of men? And I'm reminded here of something Germaine Greer said, and she's one of the foremost feminist authors out there, but she's looking back now at decades of what the pill has done to women. And she says the pill has turned women into call girls to be readily available for meaningless sex.
Wow.
It's the original, I would say, it's the original gender confusion. When we render our gender...
Did you get that point? It's the original gender confusion? That kind of stuck in my mind.
Genitals unable to generate. We are neutering the fundamental purpose in nature of the gender distinction. And we start viewing the world through condom-colored glasses, and the very meaning of gender disappears.
And this is sensitive stuff. I mean, as I'm listening to you,
I'm going to stop right there because they start getting into some things that really isn't quite as, but what's your thoughts on that? That one goes very deep. I think that one, out of everything that I've researched, what they said goes really, I mean, they're basically saying, and I don't know if I would say it completely the way they're saying it, but what they're developing is probably the most pure understanding of sex, and it's connected to the whole matrimony thing, right? Do you have any criticism about what's being said? I do, but I'm going to see what you guys say. Do you have any criticisms? Or do you think it's right on?
I think they're leading to a point, but the major point is the lack of being married and sex outside of marriage, regardless of the prevention of having children. Because once you're married, the Bible tells you to have sex with your spouse, but some people don't want to have 50 kids. So once you're within that marriage, why not have that ability to choose whether you're going to have 10 kids or 3 kids or whatever you decide?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I think they're maybe minimizing a little bit just the pleasure of sex, right? Which God gives us the pleasure of sex.
And the intimacy, it seems like they're more just functional.
Yeah.
Just it's all the function of, you have sex, have babies, and
right.
That's it.
Right. And I think as Lutherans, that's why our view on birth control has always been one that has been more liberal than the Catholics, because they always do tie it right into the matrimony part, which is really extremely important. But sex is also, as we see in the Corinthians text, it's to be enjoyed between a man and a woman. And so, yeah.
But I think they're right on the downfall of it.
Yes.
I think that did lead to some of the downfall of having sex outside of marriage.
Yes. And do you notice that Jordan Peterson and these two come up with a conclusion about the liberation of the woman associated with her ability to now take the pill and completely go on in her life in a sexual relationship without thinking about having children or not being within the framework of a family, and that's supposed to liberate them. And I thought it was very interesting that they kind of basically said the woman now becomes the man. So now if you have a man who's going out and planting a seed all over the place and not having responsibility, right? She can do the same thing. And so, the golden cow is everybody can have sex with whoever they want and there's no consequences, and that would liberate everybody. Well, no, it won't. because now you're outside of the context by which what we've already defined where sex is supposed to be.
Where the other side of it is that the women are now just objectified to where instead of being liberated to be their own person, you know, to discover whatever you want to do, create whatever you want to create. Now you're just an object of
That's right.
for men.
That's right. And I think our society has told women, in order to be a strong woman, you have to be like a man. And in my experience, when I marry people, I don't see that in women. When I get down to actually talking to them and what they want, you know, we're back to the question of what do you want in a man? Do you want him to provide for you and protect you? And like they say, if you're gonna have sex and have a child, he'll be there for you and you'll raise the child together and he'll create the environment where you won't have to be a single mother, right? And every women want that. And so I think they've been sold this thing, you know, you got to get out from underneath your man and be like a man and do everything a man can do. And that's not a woman. It's not a woman. That's not how God designed us. And so I think a lot of people have, a lot of women, you know, they walk around and they talk in a way in which they say, you know, I don't need a man. And there's a lot of them that have that, you know. I don't need a man anymore. I notice when I hear people say, I don't need a man, those women are hurting. I could tell they've been in bad relationships in the past. They don't want to get into an intimate relationship with somebody else. And so they basically say, okay, you know, I'll go ahead and do this, but that's not what they want, right? Make sense? Anybody else? Rush Limbaugh said it best a long time ago. He said, women are giving up what it means to be a woman. The best parts of what is to be a woman, to grab what's the worst parts of being a man. Just remember him saying that a long time ago. That was deep. Yeah. That was back when I was in Michigan. I heard him say that when I was a Prudential guy on the road. So this is where we're moving with this whole thing now. Any thoughts? I think you can. Good place to stop right here. I have another video, but I'm going to save that for this. These two are the better of the three. Okay, we'll continue next week. Let's have a prayer. Dear Father, we thank you for enlightening us by your word and reminding us that your will is always best. I pray for all the married couples that are here, and I pray for the single people too, but that you would nurture our marriages and help us along the way, especially as we raise our families, and help us as a church to stand for the truth and be witnesses of your truth through Jesus. First of all, knowing your forgiveness, and also being able to help people to see your goodness as it has to do with marriage and sexual relationships. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.